Ethan Carter lived by routine. Ever since college, life had been steady, predictable, especially after meeting Natalie, an ambitious art student. Their bond was immediate, built on shared dreams, though their paths eventually split. Ethan opened a printing shop in Elmville, while Natalie pursued her art. Their marriage, despite differing interests, seemed strong, a life built on mutual support. The highlight of their happiness was the birth of their daughter, Sophie. She became their world. But over time, subtle shifts crept in. Conversations shortened, connection faded, and though Ethan noticed, he was too caught up in work to address it, until Natalie's growing distance became undeniable. Sitting at his desk, Ethan mulled over the changes. Since Christmas, Natalie had seemed absent, not physically, but emotionally. Their once deep talks had turned into shallow exchanges, and whenever he asked if something was wrong, she would brush him off. The lack of intimacy, the avoidance, it was getting worse. For the past 5 months, Natalie had been attending evening art classes, but they seemed to be running later than usual. On other nights, she locked herself in her studio for hours. Twice, Ethan had stopped by her university unannounced, half expecting to find something suspicious, but she was always there, painting. Yet, something in his gut told him he was missing the bigger picture. His thoughts were interrupted by his assistant, Laura. Ethan, Natalie's on the phone. Laura had been a lifesaver since joining the business, taking over the administrative chaos so Ethan could focus on operations. He picked up the phone. "Hey dear, everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Ethan," Natalie responded, her tone devoid of warmth. "Will you be home at your usual time tonight?" "Yes, Laura's handling things here." "Good," she said flatly. "I need to talk to you. See you at 5:15. "Goodbye," she added, hanging up before he could respond. Ethan stared at the receiver. Not long ago, she would have lingered on the call, teasing him, laughing. Now, it was as if she couldn't wait to get away. He picked up a photo from their Florida vacation last year. They had been so happy then, wrapped in each other's arms, smiling under the sun. That version of them no longer existed. The phone rang again, snapping him back. He finished his work, but thoughts of Natalie's distant behavior gnawed at him. Later, just before closing, Laura and Daniel, his only other employee, walked in. "Ethan, we've got a rush job due in the morning," Laura informed him. Ethan couldn't stay late, not tonight. Daniel sighed but agreed to work overtime. Grateful, Ethan grabbed his things and left, eager to get home. When he walked into the kitchen, Natalie was staring out the window, lost in thought. "Hey," he greeted, stepping forward to kiss her. She pulled away. "Please, Ethan, don't." A knot tightened in his stomach. "What's wrong?" "I need to talk to you." Without a word, he followed her into the living room. She sat down, hands clasped, face unreadable. "Ethan, I'm leaving you." She hesitated, then corrected herself. "No, I'm divorcing you." His chest tightened. "What?" "I've fallen in love with someone else," she said, her voice cold and detached. Ethan's mind raced. "Who?" "Lucas. My professor." His breath caught. "Lucas Bennett?" Natalie nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Yes." Her voice was eerily calm. "I never planned this, but it happened. He understands me in ways you never could. We have the same passions, the same outlook on life. Lucas is leaving for Paris at the end of the semester, and I'm going with him, as his wife." Ethan reeled. The life they had built together, the years of love, the family, it was all unraveling in an instant. He wanted to argue, to make her see reason, but deep down, he knew there was nothing left to salvage. The woman he had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger. Natalie stood abruptly. "My lawyer will send the divorce papers Monday." She grabbed her suitcases. "I'm leaving now. Sophie's with my parents. They'll bring her home at 7. Ethan followed her to the front hall, watching as she picked up her bags and walked out. At the bottom of the stairs, Lucas Bennett appeared, smirking as he took one of her suitcases. Ethan clenched his fists, rage boiling beneath the surface, but he said nothing. Natalie didn't even look back. He shut the door behind them, standing in silence as the weight of it all crashed down. He collapsed onto the sofa, tears falling freely as he tried to process what had just happened. Time blurred until the doorbell rang. For a fleeting moment, he dared to hope Natalie had changed her mind. But when he opened the door, it was Thomas Reeves, Natalie's father, standing there, his face lined with disappointment. "So," Thomas sighed, "I see she told you." Ethan swallowed hard, unable to speak. "I can't believe she fell for that guy," Thomas muttered, shaking his head. Behind him, Margaret and Olivia entered, carrying Sophie and her things. Their tear-streaked faces told Ethan they had been crying for hours. Sophie, however, was oblivious, babbling cheerfully in her grandmother's arms. Ethan stood, and without hesitation, they embraced him. With no siblings and his parents long gone, Natalie's family was the only family he had left. Ethan sat with the Reeves family, trying to process the night's events. None of them could believe it. Tears were shed again as disbelief hung in the air. Around 7:30, Margaret suggested they eat, and she and Thomas went to the kitchen to prepare sandwiches. Olivia handed Sophie to Ethan, who let his daughter play in his lap. Despite the heartbreak, Sophie's laughter offered a fleeting sense of normalcy. Soon, they gathered around the coffee table, sharing a meal in silence. Ethan had no appetite, but he ate anyway, grateful for the company. He observed Thomas and Margaret, both retired but active, and Olivia, a quiet 16-year-old with braces. After dinner, Sophie stood at the table, grabbing at plates, drawing small smiles from the room. By 8:30, Olivia volunteered to put Sophie to bed, giving Ethan a chance to discuss the logistics of his new reality with Thomas and Margaret. They agreed he would need daycare, but Margaret offered to help for now. Ethan planned to take the next day off to sort things out. Olivia returned, reporting Sophie was asleep. Ethan thanked her, and after a while, the Reeves family prepared to leave. He expressed his gratitude, locked the door behind them, then checked on Sophie. She was curled up with her teddy bear, blissfully unaware of the chaos her mother had left behind. Back downstairs, Ethan poured himself a stiff drink, the warmth of the scotch dulling his sorrow. But as the alcohol settled in, grief gave way to anger. Natalie had shattered their family and expected to walk away without consequence. He wasn't about to make it easy for her. Determined to reclaim some control, Ethan went upstairs to the master bedroom and turned on the light. The sight of the empty closet and bare dresser hit him hard. The bathroom, once cluttered with Natalie's things, was eerily clean. The void she left behind was undeniable. He shut the light off and collapsed onto the bed, tears slipping down his face as the reality of her absence sank in. Natalie was gone. He doubted he could win her back, but he had to try. The scotch eventually pulled him into a restless sleep, still dressed in yesterday's clothes. Ethan woke early, sore from sleeping in his clothes. He took a hot shower, forcing himself through the motions of his morning routine. The weight of Natalie's absence hung over him, but he had no choice but to keep moving. He checked on Sophie, who was still sleeping, her tiny hands wrapped around her teddy. He kissed her cheek, then went downstairs to make breakfast. He wasn't hungry, but he forced himself to eat, knowing he needed strength. After setting out cereal and coffee, he tried to focus on work at the kitchen table. It was futile. His thoughts drifted to Natalie, where she was, what she was doing, how easily she had discarded their life together. A sudden cry from Sophie snapped him out of it. He found her sitting up in bed, eyes wide with confusion. As soon as she realized it was him feeding her instead of Natalie, she burst into tears. Ethan struggled to soothe her, eventually distracting her with a toy. His heart ached. She didn't understand, but she could feel the absence. After calming Sophie, he called the office, leaving a message for Laura to get in touch. When she returned his call, he explained he'd be working from home most of the day but would check in later. He didn't mention Natalie. Soon after, Margaret arrived to help with Sophie. Ethan, exhausted, joined her in the living room around 10 a.m. "You look terrible," Margaret remarked gently. "Didn't sleep much," Ethan admitted. Scotch helped, but not enough. Margaret hesitated before speaking again. "Ethan, I need to tell you something. Natalie confided in me before she left." He tensed. "What?" "She said things with Lucas became physical 2 weeks ago. That's why she's been so distant." Ethan's stomach dropped, but he swallowed his rage. Of course. She also said something else, Margaret added hesitantly. That you were the more considerate lover. This wasn't about that. It was about her. Ethan exhaled sharply. It wasn't much of a consolation, but at least he knew the truth. Doesn't change anything. She's made her choice. Margaret nodded. I just thought you should know. Ethan decided to bury himself in work instead of dwelling on Natalie. He kissed Sophie goodbye and headed to the office, determined not to let his business suffer. When Ethan arrived, Laura was on the phone, so he went straight to his desk, needing a moment to compose himself. He handed her the files he had worked on at home, noticing her concerned expression. Laura, he said finally, I need to talk to you. Close the door. She obeyed, sitting across from him. He exhaled, the words bitter on his tongue. I'm dealing with something serious at home. My wife left me last night, but she didn't take our daughter. I'm a single parent now. Laura's eyes widened. Ethan, I'm sorry. You've only been here 2 weeks, but you've already proven yourself, he continued. I need stability at work. I want to make you office manager. A raise of $1.50 for now. We'll reevaluate in a month. She looked surprised but nodded. Of course. I'm up for it. I'm really sorry about Natalie. Ethan appreciated her professionalism. Thanks. I need your help keeping this place running while I juggle everything. Afterward, he informed Daniel, who offered his support. Ethan worked through the afternoon, avoiding thoughts of Natalie, before heading home with files to finish. Margaret greeted him at the door. Sophie had a rough time at lunch. She was looking for Natalie. Ethan's heart clenched, but he nodded. I expected that. He set up his din to work, realizing he needed better equipment for working from home. The hours passed quickly, and by 4:30, he wrapped up. As Margaret started dinner, she mentioned she had a prior commitment over the weekend. Olivia could help with Sophie, she suggested. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I'd appreciate that. For the first time in hours, a small sense of relief settled in. He wasn't alone in this. He had Sophie, he had the Reeves family, and somehow, he would figure out how to move forward. Ethan sat with Sophie after Margaret left, feeding her as she cried for her mother again. He soothed her as best he could, distracting her with toys, but the ache in his chest only deepened. The evening passed quietly, and once Sophie was bathed and asleep, Ethan poured himself another scotch, sinking into thought. Midnight came and went before he finally dragged himself to bed. Monday morning arrived too soon. Lying there, he reflected on the weekend. Olivia had come over Saturday and immediately taken charge of Sophie, giving him time to transform his den into a proper office. By Sunday afternoon, it was fully set up, allowing him to focus on Sophie. They spent time at the park, where Olivia kept Sophie entertained despite a few tantrums. That evening, Margaret picked up Olivia, promising to return Monday morning. By 8:30, Margaret arrived, and Ethan headed to work. The day stayed busy until Laura entered his office, handing him a courier envelope with a concerned look. This just arrived, she said softly. Ethan's stomach nodded as he opened it. Divorce papers. Natalie hadn't wasted any time. The documents outlined visitation terms for Sophie and the official end of their marriage. He closed the folder and slipped it into his briefcase. He needed to call his lawyer, but right now, he didn't have the strength to deal with it. Wednesday lingered in his mind. He would have to see Natalie, and the thought made his stomach churn. Monday and Tuesday blurred, but by Wednesday morning, he woke earlier than usual, eager to leave before Natalie arrived. When the doorbell rang at 8:30, he braced himself and opened the door. Natalie stood outside, facing the street, avoiding eye contact. Come in, Ethan said stiffly. Sophie's still asleep. I'll be leaving now. Without waiting for a response, he grabbed his briefcase and walked out through the side door, relief washing over him. He wasn't ready to face her, wasn't sure he ever would be. The day dragged on, his thoughts stuck on the fact that Natalie was in his house. Twice, he nearly broke down, the emotional toll heavier than he had expected. By 4:30, he picked up the phone and called home. I'll be home around 5, he told Natalie. Leave through the front door when I come in through the side. I can't do this today. A brief pause, then, all right. When he arrived home, He heard the door close as he stepped inside. He glanced out the window, watching Natalie drive away without a second glance. Dinner was miserable. He barely ate, and Sophie, after finishing her food, broke down crying for her mother. He tried everything to console her, but nothing worked. She sobbed until she could barely breathe, leaving Ethan feeling helpless. Eventually, he calmed her down, bathed her, and stayed with her until she fell asleep. Drained, he poured another scotch and sat in silence, staring at the walls. By 1:30, he knew he couldn't keep going like this. He needed to act. Tomorrow, he would call his lawyer. Thursday morning, Ethan made the call and scheduled an afternoon meeting. At 2 o'clock, he sat across from Greg Mitchell and handed him the divorce papers. Greg scanned through them and raised an eyebrow. These are surprisingly fair. No personal or child support. Ethan nodded. Yeah, but it's not enough. Greg frowned. What do you mean? I want full custody. No shared rights. No visitation. I want her out of Sophie's life entirely. And I want a legally binding order keeping her at least 500 feet away. Greg sighed. That's a stretch, Ethan. She might not agree. Send the letter, Ethan said firmly. Let's see what she does. Greg reluctantly agreed, and Ethan left feeling a sense of control for the first time since Natalie left. The rest of the week passed uneventfully, and by Friday, he decided to keep the same weekend arrangement with Olivia. It had worked well, and he needed the help. Olivia agreed, and the weekend went smoothly. She even brought her homework, and Ethan helped her with geometry and algebra while Sophie napped. She considered it a fair trade for babysitting. Tuesday, February 12th, began like any other, with Ethan settling into his new work-from-home routine. The business was busier, and Laura handled things efficiently, rarely needing his input. Just before noon, his phone rang. Ethan, it's Greg Mitchell. Can you come in at 2 o'clock? Ethan tensed. She responded. Greg chuckled. You're not going to believe this. She agreed. Ethan was silent. All of it, Greg continued. No custody, no rights, no contact. I've never seen a case settle this fast. Ethan barely processed the words. It was over. Officially over. At Greg's office, he signed the final documents and left early, telling Laura he'd be working from home the rest of the week. Tuesday went smoothly, but the next few days were exhausting. Trying to balance work and Sophie alone was overwhelming. By Friday night, after putting Sophie to bed, he poured another scotch and faced reality. He needed a better plan. Saturday morning, he called Margaret. Can I come by this afternoon? He asked. Of course, she said. Come at 2. Stay for dinner. Ethan gladly accepted. That afternoon, as soon as they arrived, Olivia scooped Sophie up, playing with her like they had been apart for weeks. It was exactly what Ethan had hoped for. Sitting with Thomas and Margaret, he explained the latest developments. They were shocked Natalie had relinquished her parental rights, but understood why he had pushed for it. Then he made his proposal. I need stability, he admitted. My business is growing, and I need to be at the office more. What if Olivia moved in? She could watch Sophie after school until I get home. I'd pay her for it. Thomas and Margaret exchanged looks. Finally, Margaret nodded. That might be the best thing for Sophie right now. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could make this work. Ethan explained that having Olivia move in would also allow Thomas and Margaret the freedom to travel. He emphasized that they should discuss it with her and decide soon. Margaret agreed it was a good idea and suggested they talk to Olivia after dinner, giving Ethan an answer the next day. They all agreed and shifted to lighter topics for the rest of the evening. After a pleasant visit, Ethan and Sophie returned home and spent a quiet Saturday night together. On Sunday morning, as expected, Margaret called. She told him Olivia was excited about the arrangement, and both she and Thomas agreed it could work. Since there was a time crunch, Thomas offered to come over that afternoon to help set up Olivia's room. When Thomas arrived, Ethan showed him the house layout. The master bedroom and bath were on one side of the upstairs hallway, Natalie's former studio on the other. Sophie's room and the main bathroom were nearby, with the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. Together, they cleared the guest room of unnecessary items to make space for Olivia's things. They decided her computer desk and study materials would go in Natalie's old studio. Thomas offered to buy a rug, blinds, and curtains, knowing Ethan was busy with work and Sophie. They also planned to install child-proof gates for Sophie's safety. On Monday, February 18th, Ethan called Laura, instructing her to reach him on his cell for any emergencies and to leave evening printing jobs for him as long as Daniel had other work. The day was smooth, with only 2 brief calls from Laura. At 3 p.m., Thomas, Margaret, and Olivia arrived, bringing enough of Olivia's belongings for a 2-week stay. After setting up her room, they settled in. Ethan thanked them, kissed Sophie goodbye, and headed to the office. Once there, he called a meeting with Daniel and Laura to explain his new schedule. He would now arrive around 3 p.m., handle calls and meetings during business hours, and focus on printing jobs after 5 p.m. to reduce Daniel's overtime. Daniel and Laura had no objections. Ethan worked through the evening, took a break for a quick meal, and finished 2 small printing jobs. By 9 p.m., he decided to head home early to check on Olivia. The house was quiet when he arrived. Olivia was in her pajamas, sitting at her desk, surrounded by school books. "How's everything going?" he asked. Olivia looked up. Sophie was a little fussy, but she's fine now. She then hesitated before asking for help with her math homework. Ethan agreed, freshened up, and returned to assist her. As they worked, he noticed she was more at ease around him, even smiling more frequently. Though she still blushed slightly when their hands accidentally touched, their bond had grown stronger. The rest of the week passed smoothly. They established a rhythm. Ethan handled breakfast, Olivia packed lunches and fed Sophie, and Ethan took over Sophie's care once Olivia left for school. Twice, he finished work early and joined Olivia for dinner, impressed by her cooking. One evening, he stayed home longer so Olivia could study for a test, then returned to the office to catch up on work. Their first weekend under the new arrangement also went well. Olivia watched Sophie while Ethan worked Saturday afternoon, and in the evening, Ethan took over so Olivia could go out with friends. On Sunday, Ethan invited Thomas and Margaret over for dinner to reflect on how the week had gone. They agreed everything was working well and decided to make the arrangement permanent. Olivia's remaining clothes would be moved over during the week, and Ethan would set up temporary guardianship papers so he could handle school and emergency matters. 2 bank accounts would be created, one for Olivia's wages and another for her clothing, allowance, and other expenses funded by her parents. Thomas and Margaret, eager to travel in their motorhome, planned to prepare it that week. They also decided to buy a dolly to tow their car and aimed to leave in 2 weeks. The next 2 weeks flew by as Ethan and Olivia refined their daily routine. The only disruption came when a major client unexpectedly needed to meet with Ethan. He asked his neighbor, Helen Dawson, a 60-year-old widow, to babysit Sophie. Helen enjoyed it so much that she offered to help anytime, which was a relief to Ethan. His business remained steady, and working evenings allowed him to avoid hiring additional staff. Laura had become so capable that she rarely needed to call him at home. The pressure he had felt since Natalie left began to lift, and for the first time in a long while, he started to enjoy life again. Since Natalie's departure, Ethan had ignored his emotional and physical needs. As the 1-month mark of her leaving approached, he found himself reminiscing about his first college girlfriend. Though Natalie still lingered in his thoughts, he was slowly accepting life without her. He also made a conscious effort to cut down on his nightly scotch, recognizing the potential for it to become a problem. He had too much to live for, especially Sophie. On Sunday, March 10th, Thomas and Margaret joined Ethan, Olivia, and Sophie for dinner before their motorhome trip. After the meal, they gathered in the living room, watching Sophie play and talking. "I don't understand how Natalie hasn't called once," Margaret said, frustration evident in her voice. Thomas nodded. "I'm surprised, too." Ethan leaned back. "Given the terms of the separation, I didn't expect to hear from her." During the conversation, Ethan glanced at Olivia and suddenly recalled seeing her drive. "Olivia, do you have your license?" he asked. Thomas confirmed that Olivia had her license, but mentioned they would be taking their car on their trip. Ethan offered to insure Natalie's car so Olivia could use it for school and errands, an idea both Thomas and Olivia appreciated. She excitedly agreed, promising to drive carefully. As the evening wound down, Olivia put Sophie to bed while Thomas and Margaret made final preparations for their early departure. They said their goodbyes, promising to call regularly. Ethan and Olivia waved them off from the front door before settling into their evening routines. The next couple of weeks flew by as Ethan and Olivia adjusted to their new responsibilities. With Olivia now driving, she handled most of the grocery shopping, usually on Saturdays while Ethan watched Sophie. On the morning of Wednesday, March 27th, Olivia slept in due to her morning classes being canceled. She had asked Ethan to get Sophie up, which was usually her task. After breakfast, Sophie began looking around and fussing. Ethan sighed, hoping she would soon stop missing her mother, but the cries continued. At that moment, Olivia came downstairs in her pajamas, yawning as she grabbed breakfast. Sophie immediately stopped crying the moment she saw her. Ethan smirked. "Looks like she's missing you, not Natalie. Better not move back home anytime soon." Olivia laughed, picking Sophie up. "Don't worry. I'm not going anywhere," she assured him before heading back upstairs. On Thursday, April 4th, around 10 a.m., Ethan had just finished reading to Sophie, who was now happily scribbling with a crayon in her high chair when the doorbell rang. Making sure Sophie was secure, he answered it and found Jessica Harper, an old friend of Natalie's, standing outside. "Hi, Jessica. Long time no see," Ethan greeted, surprised. "Hi, Ethan. I thought I'd stop by for some coffee." "Your office said you work from home now," she replied. Curious about her sudden visit, Ethan invited her in. They sat in the kitchen over coffee, and as always, Jessica looked stylish, her white sweater clinging to her curves. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "So, Jessica, what's the real reason you're here?" Jessica smiled knowingly. "I've been talking to Natalie. She knows she can't contact you directly, but she asked me to check in. She's not trying to stir anything up. She just wants a few photos of Sophie." Ethan considered it for a moment before nodding. "That's fine. I get why she'd want them. Might make things harder for her, though." Jessica took a few pictures of Sophie coloring and admitted she had told Natalie she was making a mistake. She even mentioned that if her ex had been more like Ethan, she never would have divorced him. "Thanks for the support," Ethan said, though his thoughts lingered on how difficult the past months had been. He explained how rough things were in the beginning, but that hiring a nanny had helped. Jessica looked intrigued. "A nanny?" Before Ethan could explain, her phone rang. She groaned, realizing she had forgotten a hair appointment. Apologizing, she quickly snapped a few more photos, including one of Ethan holding Sophie. As she left, she mentioned she'd update Natalie and check in again if Ethan was okay with it. He nodded absently, already dreading the next visit. On Wednesday, May 1st, Thomas and Margaret returned from their trip, and Ethan and Olivia invited them over for dinner. They shared travel stories, mentioning a couple they had met who shared their interests. Excited about another trip starting May 15th, they were eager to hear how things had gone at home. Ethan reassured them that everything was running smoothly. Business was steady, and Olivia had been an enormous help. Sophie was adjusting well, even taking her first steps and beginning to say Dada and Baba. Her grandparents were thrilled. Olivia also had news. Her orthodontist said her braces could come off in Margaret. She had decided to pursue a career in graphic design, though her parents encouraged her to keep an open mind until she finished high school. Ethan chuckled. "I might need a graphic designer in the future. You could work for me someday." Olivia grinned. "I'll think about it." Ethan then told them about Natalie sending Jessica for photos. They agreed it was understandable, but found it odd that Natalie still hadn't reached out herself. The week passed as usual until Wednesday when Ethan received a call from Greg Mitchell. The divorce papers were finalized and would be official in 3 weeks. The news hit him harder than he expected. Instead of working, he lay on his bed, lost in thought, the old ache in his chest returning. Later, Jessica called to arrange another visit for more photos, but Ethan wasn't ready. He asked her to wait until the following week. He couldn't deal with anything related to Natalie right now. Monday, May 27th, marked the end of a difficult month. The divorce had been finalized the previous week, and he now had the documents to prove it. That afternoon, Ethan confided in Laura at work, who was concerned enough to check in on him later that evening. Instead of answering, he retreated to his office with a scotch, trying to numb the weight of it all. Olivia, noticing his absence, eventually found him sitting alone, tears in his eyes. Without a word, she sat beside him, offering quiet comfort. "You still have me and Sophie," she reminded him softly. Ethan gave her a small, grateful smile, though the pain lingered. The following Monday brought another blow. Olivia returned home after visiting her parents and hesitated before speaking. "Ethan," Natalie called. He froze. "What?" Olivia's voice was quiet. "She wanted me to tell you that she's marrying Lucas Bennett on Saturday. They're leaving for Paris on Sunday." Ethan's face went pale. His hands trembled as he whispered, "Oh God." Tears filled his eyes, and he looked away, his breath shaky. Olivia watched him, sadness in her expression. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Ethan swallowed hard. "Thanks for telling me. For being here for Sophie. I'm not going to be great company tonight." Olivia nodded, understanding. As Ethan grabbed his keys and headed to the office to clear his head, she quietly called her parents to share the news. She only wished she could help Ethan let go of Natalie for good. On Tuesday, Margaret 11, Ethan waited for Olivia to return from her final orthodontist appointment, hoping that getting her braces off would boost her confidence. When she arrived, he grinned. "Let's see that big smile you've been hiding," he teased. Olivia flashed a wide smile, and Ethan encouraged her to show it more often, telling her she was beautiful. Blushing, she hugged him and kissed his cheek. Ethan, caught off guard, felt heat rise to his face. By Monday, July 1st, Ethan had been busier with work and hadn't joined Olivia and Sophie for dinner as often. Wanting to make up for it, he planned a family-filled holiday weekend. On Saturday, he focused on chores and cooking, urging Olivia to go out with her friends that evening. Meanwhile, he spent the night playing with Sophie, reading to her, and singing lullabies at bedtime. Olivia returned at 11:30, and they relaxed, watching Saturday Night Live together, laughing at the jokes. Sunday was spent at the local zoo with one of Olivia's friends. Ethan enjoyed watching them have fun while he pushed Sophie's stroller. They wrapped up the day with dinner at a family restaurant, where the girls helped keep Sophie entertained. Monday's 4th of July celebration included a picnic at the park. Olivia brought another friend, and they socialized while Sophie played. As the night ended with ice cream and fireworks, Olivia hugged Ethan and thanked him for a great weekend before heading to bed. He smiled, happy to see her enjoying herself. A week later, Thomas and Margaret returned from their trip, spending many evenings and weekends with Ethan, Olivia, and Sophie, sharing stories and photos from their travels. Ethan adjusted his schedule to spend more evenings with Sophie and give Olivia time with her friends. Once a month, Jessica Harper visited to take photos of Sophie for Natalie in Paris. During a July visit, Jessica hinted at her interest in Ethan, suggesting he should ask her out. He politely declined, saying he wasn't ready, but she made it clear she wanted to be first in line when he was. In early August, Ethan overheard Thomas and Margaret discussing Olivia's upcoming birthday and realized he needed to get her a gift as well. On the morning of Saturday, August 17th, Ethan woke early to prepare a surprise breakfast. When Olivia came downstairs, she was greeted by a happy birthday, Olivia banner, a festive tablecloth, and candles on the table. "Good morning, birthday girl," Ethan said, setting down a plate of blueberry pancakes, which her mother had mentioned were her favorite. Olivia, touched, smiled warmly. "Thank you, Ethan. This is amazing." After breakfast, Ethan handed her a card and a gift certificate for a day at Domenico's beauty spa. Olivia was thrilled and hugged him tightly, though he gently pulled back, feeling a bit awkward. He kissed her forehead and wished her a happy birthday. Later at her parents' house, Olivia's mother teasingly pointed out that the spa package included a bikini wax, embarrassing Olivia. She blushed furiously before laughing it off. On Tuesday, September 10th, Olivia started her senior year of high school. Her first class wasn't until 11 a.m., so she relaxed at home. Hearing the doorbell, she peeked downstairs and saw a well-dressed woman taking photos of Sophie. Olivia frowned as the woman flirtatiously touched Ethan's chest and laughed. "I'll hold you to that next month for sure," the woman said with a playful smirk before leaving. Olivia retreated to her room, uneasy. Later, she asked Ethan who the woman was. "Oh, that was Jessica Harper," he explained. "She's Natalie's friend. She takes photos of Sophie for her." Still bothered, Olivia left for school, deep in thought. On Wednesday, October 16th, a warm fall day, Ethan was outside with Sophie, who was playing in the fenced yard as part of her toilet training. A camera shutter clicked, and Ethan looked up to see Jessica Harper arriving. "Hello, Jessica. I didn't see you there. How are you?" Ethan greeted. "I'm good, but I'd be even better if you took me out for dinner this weekend," she replied with a flirty smile. Ethan chuckled. "Saturday night, then?" Jessica grinned. "Perfect. Dinner and dancing?" Ethan hesitated. "You might have to pick the place. I haven't danced in years." Jessica winked. "We can always dance at my place if we don't find a spot." She snapped a few more photos and left, reminding him to make reservations. That evening at dinner, Ethan asked Olivia if she was free to babysit on Saturday since he had a date with Jessica. Olivia's smile faded slightly, but she nodded. "Of course," she said, though she seemed distant. After Ethan left for work, Olivia sat alone, feeling a strange sadness she couldn't quite explain. Confiding in Sophie, she admitted she wasn't sure why it upset her so much. Determined not to lose Ethan's attention to someone like Jessica, she decided to use her spa gift certificate and start working out. If Jessica wanted to compete, she would make sure she stood a chance. Meanwhile, Ethan was at the office, feeling excited about his date. For the first time in a long while, he felt ready to move on. He made dinner reservations and finished his work with renewed energy. When he got home, he noticed Olivia's bedroom light was still on. Curious, he walked down the hall and gently knocked on her door. Seeing Olivia had been crying, Ethan asked if she was okay. She downplayed it, saying she was just having a bad day. He reassured her that she could talk to him anytime and mentioned that Mrs. Dawson could babysit if she ever wanted a night off, but Olivia insisted she was fine with babysitting. Before he left, she asked if she could start using the exercise equipment in the basement. Ethan agreed, reminding her to be careful with Sophie around. The next morning, he noticed Olivia had already started working out. As she returned from the basement in a t-shirt and shorts, he teased, "You're putting me to shame." "No time like the present," she replied with a small smile before heading upstairs to shower. On Saturday, October 19th, Ethan anxiously waited for his date with Jessica. Olivia seemed unusually quiet, and he double-checked if she was okay with babysitting. She assured him she didn't mind. By 5:30, Ethan was dressed and ready. When he came downstairs, Olivia looked him over and said, "You look very handsome." He handed her a list of locations and phone numbers before leaving, mentioning he might be home late. After he left, Olivia held Sophie, fighting back tears. She whispered, "I hope your dad doesn't fall in love with her." Sophie babbled happily, bringing a small smile to Olivia's face. At Jessica's apartment, she greeted Ethan in a sleek black dress. He whistled in admiration before they headed to dinner at the Sheraton. Seated near the dance floor, they enjoyed drinks and conversation. Jessica admitted she was surprised he had finally asked her out, given how much he had loved Natalie. Ethan nodded. "I'm not entirely over her, but I'm trying to move on." Dinner was lighthearted, with laughter and shared dessert. They danced, and as the night progressed, Ethan became more comfortable in Jessica's arms. But when a familiar song played, one that had been special to him and Natalie, his mood shifted. Jessica noticed and teased him, but Ethan explained the song's significance. She didn't push, and after taking a short break, they returned to the dance floor. After midnight, they left the restaurant. Outside, Jessica kissed him, and one kiss turned into more as they lingered in the car. Back at her apartment, she invited him in for a drink. They resumed kissing before she playfully reminded him about the wine. After pouring their glasses, they toasted to new beginnings. Jessica mentioned she had told Natalie she planned to ask him out, but Natalie hadn't responded. Ethan exhaled. "Let's not talk about her." Jessica took the hint. She set her glass down, unzipped her dress, and let it fall to the floor. "Well?" she asked, turning in a slow circle. Ethan's eyes traveled over her. "Amazing." They ended the night in her bed, then showered together, savoring their time. Jessica wanted him to stay, but knowing he hadn't warned Olivia he'd be out late, Ethan left at 2:30 a.m. At the door, Jessica grinned. "We need to do this again." Ethan smirked. "You won't have to twist my arm." When he arrived home, he decided against using the garage, worried the noise might wake Olivia. As he walked to the front door, he noticed a light on upstairs. Olivia was watching from her window. Feeling uneasy, Ethan knocked on her door. "Everything okay?" Her voice was quiet. "Yeah, everything's fine." Sensing something was off, he asked if he could come in. When she agreed, he stepped inside and saw the dried tear tracks on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. Olivia hesitated, then asked, "Are you in love with Jessica?" Ethan blinked. "What?" Olivia looked away. "Is she moving in?" "Because I don't want to leave. I don't want to lose you and Sophie." Stunned, Ethan sat beside her. "Olivia, I'm not in love with Jessica. We're just friends." He sighed. "And I have no plans to move her in. Sophie has bonded with you like a mother. I want you to stay, at least until she starts school." Relief flooded Olivia's face. She gave him a grateful smile. "Thank you." Ethan ruffled her hair lightly. "You don't have to worry about that." Olivia let out a small laugh. "Okay. Now, let's both get some sleep before Sophie wakes up," Ethan said before leaving the room. Olivia lay awake for a while, thinking, before finally falling asleep with a smile. On Wednesday, October 23rd, Ethan was about to leave for work when Olivia came home from school, unusually cheerful. "Do you have plans on November 16th? She asked. "No, why?" She grinned. "Good, because I made dinner reservations for your birthday. Mrs. Dawson will babysit Sophie." Ethan was touched. "That's really thoughtful, Olivia. Thank you." The weeks leading up to his birthday were smooth. His business continued thriving. He had hired another printer, bought new equipment, and Laura was proving to be an excellent office manager. She even suggested hiring a part-time graphic design student, which improved their work quality. Ethan had gone out with Jessica again, spending another night with her. He noticed Olivia seemed distant afterward, but returned to normal within a few days. Meanwhile, Sophie was growing quickly, speaking more words and proudly showing off her toilet training progress. Her grandparents were impressed by how much she had changed. On the morning of November 16th, Olivia left before 9 a.m. for errands, while Ethan spent the day with Sophie, reading her favorite books until she napped. While she slept, he caught up on office work. Later, he took her for a walk, and as they returned home, he noticed Olivia's car was already in the driveway. At 4:30, Mrs. Dawson arrived to babysit. After making sure she had everything she needed, Ethan went upstairs to get ready for his birthday dinner with Olivia. At 5:30, Ethan stood downstairs when Mrs. Dawson suddenly gasped, "Oh my gosh, Olivia, just look at you." Ethan turned and immediately understood why. Olivia's usual ponytail was gone, replaced by a sleek, highlighted cut. Her makeup was flawless, nails manicured, and she wore a black spaghetti strap dress with a knee-length skirt, carrying a matching purse. "Olivia, you look amazing," Ethan said. "You've gone from 17 to 21 since this morning." Olivia beamed. "Thank you, Ethan. I used your gift certificate. It was time for a change." Mrs. Dawson turned Olivia around to show off the transformation, adding, "You've really grown from a girl into a woman." Blushing, Olivia smiled and took Ethan's arm. "Well, Mrs. Dawson, do we look like a couple?" Mrs. Dawson chuckled. "You sure do. You need a picture." Ethan retrieved his camera, and Mrs. Dawson took several photos before they left. As Ethan helped Olivia into the car, he asked, "So, where are we going?" "I reserved a table at the Sheraton. Figured it must be good since you took Jessica there." "You know Mrs. Dawson pretty well, huh?" Ethan remarked. Olivia nodded. "She stops by sometimes when you're at work. We talk a lot. She's really nice." At the Sheraton, they were seated quickly. Ethan couldn't get over how much Olivia had matured, not just in looks but in confidence. Shortly after, the waitress took their drink orders, mistakenly assuming Olivia was his wife. Grinning, Olivia ordered a Coke while Ethan laughed at the mix-up. Dinner was delicious, and their conversation was deeper than usual. They shared a dessert, and as the band started playing, Ethan noticed Olivia watching the dancers. "Want to dance?" he asked. "I'd love to," she said, mentioning her father had taught her to slow dance. They danced to 3 songs before the music sped up. Olivia was graceful and confident, and Ethan enjoyed their time on the dance floor. Throughout the night, They danced 5 more slow songs, neither wanting the evening to end. As they returned to the car, Olivia looked radiant, and Ethan couldn't stop smiling. "There's one last thing I want to give you for your birthday," Olivia said softly. She leaned over and kissed him gently on the lips. Though brief, it left Ethan momentarily speechless. Before he could react, Olivia stepped out of the car, and he quickly followed to help her inside. Back home, they had coffee with Mrs. Dawson, recounting their evening. After she left, Ethan took Olivia's hands. "Thank you for tonight," he said sincerely. "It was the best birthday I've had in years." Olivia's eyes shone. "I'm so glad." They walked upstairs together, and as Ethan stopped at his bedroom door, Olivia waved. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Olivia," he replied. Lying in bed, he stayed awake for another hour, replaying the evening in his mind. On Tuesday, December 31st, at 7 p.m., Ethan poured himself a small scotch while waiting for Olivia to get ready for their New Year's Eve party. Thomas and Margaret had returned on December 15th, and they had all spent a lot of time together over Christmas. Thomas and Margaret had insisted that Ethan and Olivia join them at the Sheraton Ballroom for New Year's Eve. Olivia volunteered to be the designated driver, so Ethan looked forward to enjoying a carefree evening. As he sipped his drink, he reflected on the past few weeks. Thomas and Margaret were amazed by how much Olivia had changed during their trip. Her new look and confidence made her seem like a different person. Ethan had also been busy. His business was thriving, and he had given his employees reduced hours between Christmas and New Year's. Christmas had been full of laughter, especially when Margaret and Olivia repeatedly caught Ethan under the mistletoe. At 8 p.m., after Mrs. Dawson arrived to babysit, Ethan and Olivia picked up her parents and headed to the party. At the Sheraton, they met Ethan's friends, Ryan and Melissa. The three couples spent the night dancing and enjoying the lively atmosphere. Olivia relished being part of the adult group, taking turns dancing with Ethan, her father, and Ryan. As midnight approached, Olivia made sure Ethan was on the dance floor with her. "This has been the best year of my life," she whispered. Ethan looked at her warmly. "This year started miserably for me, but it's ending much better. I've loved having you in my home. Sophie adores you like a mother." Olivia's voice softened. "That's so sweet, Ethan. I couldn't love her more if she were my own." The countdown began, and as the room erupted in cheers, Ethan gave Olivia a quick kiss. "Happy New Year, Olivia." "Happy New Year, Ethan." Thomas and Margaret soon joined them with warm wishes, and before long, Thomas swept Olivia onto the dance floor for another song. As they danced, Thomas spoke gently. "Your mother and I noticed you seem fond of Ethan. Just remember, he's been through a lot with your sister. Be careful with his feelings and don't rush things. You're still young." Olivia reassured him. "I'd never hurt Ethan, Daddy. I really do like him, but I'll wait until I'm 18 before saying anything. I promise." Later that night, back in her room, Olivia reflected on her father's words. She knew he was right, but waiting didn't make it any easier. Sleep didn't come quickly. On Saturday, March 15th, Olivia went grocery shopping while Mrs. Dawson visited Ethan and Sophie. She offered to take Sophie for a walk, and Ethan helped get Sophie ready, knowing she'd only walk a short distance before wanting to be carried. As Ethan stepped outside to check on them, he noticed Jessica Harper taking pictures of Sophie and Mrs. Dawson. "I can't stay," Jessica called out. "I have a house showing nearby. Saw Sophie and thought I'd grab some photos for Natalie. I'll call you later this week." Her last shot was of Sophie and Mrs. Dawson standing hand in hand on the sidewalk, with Ethan watching from the doorway. As Jessica drove off, they waved goodbye. On Saturday, May 17th, Ethan prepared for a date with Jessica at a bar they had discovered months ago, a lively spot with great music. Olivia also had a date, and Mrs. Dawson would be babysitting. Ethan had noticed Olivia had been dating more frequently since the start of the year, but never the same guy for long. At first, he had felt a twinge of jealousy, but over time, he was relieved she wasn't seeing anyone seriously. Since their New Year's Eve dance and the Sheraton dinner, Ethan had started seeing Olivia as more than just a girl. He even suspected she might have a crush on him, though she was too young. Her admiration had been a confidence boost after Natalie's betrayal, but lately, she had been a little distant, and he hoped she wasn't losing interest in her job as Sophie's nanny. As he left for his date, he met Olivia's escort at the door, a flustered teenage boy. Ethan gave him a firm look. "Just don't keep her out too late." Olivia rolled her eyes but smiled. "We'll be fine, Ethan." Ethan picked up Jessica, and they had an enjoyable night of dancing and conversation before heading back to her apartment for coffee. While waiting for the coffee to brew, they kissed, and one thing led to another. Afterward, as they lay together, Jessica admitted she had met someone new, Jason Reynolds, and wanted to pursue a serious relationship. Ethan nodded. "Honestly, we've always been more physical than emotional." They both agreed it was time to move on. The next morning, Olivia joined Ethan at the kitchen table after her workout, sipping juice. "So, how was your date?" Ethan stirred his coffee. "Jessica met someone. We won't be seeing each other anymore." Olivia's reaction was subtle, but Ethan noticed the way her shoulders relaxed. "Well," she said, finishing her juice, "at least she didn't hurt you like Natalie did." She headed upstairs, looking pleased. Ethan remained at the table, watching her go. On Saturday, Margaret 21, Olivia graduated from high school. Her parents, Ethan, and Sophie attended the ceremony, celebrating her achievements. Olivia was thrilled to receive an unexpected award for being the third best student in her class, crediting Ethan for helping her in math. She made sure to get pictures with him and Sophie, and as they posed, Ethan saw her differently. She wasn't just a schoolgirl anymore. She was a woman. He wondered if she would continue living with him while attending university or if things would change. Looking back at how his life had transformed since Natalie left, Ethan felt grateful. But he also worried. Would Olivia always be a part of his future, or would she just become another memory he mourned over a late-night drink? On Sunday, August 17th, Olivia turned 18 while traveling in Minnesota with her parents, leaving Ethan and Sophie behind. Before leaving, she had been worried about Sophie, but Ethan assured her that Mrs. Dawson would help. After just 2 days, Sophie became fussy, only wanting Olivia. Eventually, Mrs. Dawson soothed her, allowing Ethan to focus on his business, which had just secured a major contract. His workload increased, keeping him busy. For Olivia's birthday, Ethan had gifted her a laptop for university, along with a bouquet of roses. She had been touched, promising to call as soon as she returned. As the week passed, Ethan missed their morning workouts, though he kept up with them, noticing changes in his physique. On Thursday, Jessica stopped by for coffee and took more photos of Sophie. She shared how things with Jason were going, though his insecurity over her past with Ethan was becoming an issue. "We agreed I'd send monthly photos of Sophie until he feels more comfortable," Ethan said. Jessica nodded, then hesitated. "I've also been hearing less from Natalie. She hinted at being deceived by Lucas, but she wouldn't give details." Ethan shrugged. "That's not my problem anymore." For the first time, he realized Natalie's hold on him had completely faded. His focus was now on Sophie and, whether he admitted it or not, Olivia. On October 8th, Olivia returned home from university and found Ethan waiting for her with coffee. Excited, she showed him an online discovery, a Parisian newspaper featuring a photo of Natalie and her husband standing beside a painting titled Sophie and Her Nanny. The painting depicted Sophie with Mrs. Dawson, but there was something odd about it. In the background, a shadowy figure that looked like Ethan stood watching. Another figure, a woman in black, stood with her back turned. Olivia frowned. "That's weird." Ethan studied it for a moment. "I think the woman in black is Natalie." Olivia looked at him. "What do you think it means?" Ethan sighed. "Regret." They stared at the screen a moment longer. "She must have used an old photo," Olivia said finally, "and replaced me with Mrs. Dawson." Ethan nodded. "It doesn't matter. Whatever she's feeling now, it's too late." Olivia said nothing, but as she glanced at Ethan, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Ethan printed copies of Natalie's painting, planning to give one to Mrs. Dawson, then settled in for coffee with Olivia. They talked about her university experience, and she admitted she had been overwhelmed at first but was now feeling more confident and excited about her upcoming classes. Ethan encouraged her, certain she would do well. On Saturday, November 15th, Olivia asked Ethan not to make any plans for his birthday. She had arranged dinner at the Sheraton, the same place they had celebrated the year before. Ethan eagerly anticipated the evening. At 5 p.m., Mrs. Dawson arrived to babysit Sophie, and Ethan got dressed in a new suit, pleased with how fit he looked after shedding nearly 20 pounds. When he came downstairs, he was struck by Olivia's beauty. She wore a green satin dress, her hair styled elegantly. "You look incredible," he said, admiring her transformation. Olivia grinned. "You clean up pretty well yourself." As they left, Olivia took Ethan's hand, and it felt natural. During the drive, they talked about her university classes. At the Sheraton, they were seated in a private alcove, enjoying a leisurely meal. Ethan noticed several men admiring Olivia and asked if she had noticed. She laughed. "Women always do." After dinner, they danced to slow songs, Olivia pressing closer than ever before. Ethan struggled to hide his reaction but continued enjoying the moment. They danced past midnight, walking back to the car hand in hand. During the drive home, Olivia unbuckled her seatbelt and snuggled against him, just as her parents used to do. When they arrived, she kissed him. This time, not the brief, playful kiss of before, but something deeper, more intentional. Inside, Ethan thanked her for the wonderful evening, but Olivia wasn't ready for the night to end. She led him upstairs, making it clear she wanted more. Ethan hesitated, mindful of their age gap and how her parents would react. "I'm old enough to make my own decisions," Olivia reassured him. They confessed their feelings, Olivia expressing her love, and Ethan admitting he had been falling for her for a long time. That night, they made love tenderly. The next morning, they woke up together, sharing a shower before preparing breakfast. Sophie joined them, completely unaware of how much had changed. Months passed. On Saturday, April 24th, Ethan spent the afternoon watching hockey after a busy morning managing payroll and accounting for his 7 employees. His routine had settled into a comfortable balance, working in the evenings so he could be with Sophie during the day, while Olivia cared for her in the evenings with help from Mrs. Dawson. It was hard to believe it had been nearly 2 years since his divorce from Natalie. So much had changed. As Ethan relaxed, the doorbell rang. Expecting a salesman, he was surprised to find Jessica standing there. "I was on a cruise," she explained, engaged now. "That's why I haven't returned your calls." Ethan congratulated her, but Jessica quickly revealed the real reason for her visit. Natalie was back in town and wanted to see him and Sophie. Ethan hesitated, then finally agreed. Jessica returned with Natalie a short while later. She looked different, slimmer, her hair shorter, her face more worn. After some small talk, Natalie got to the point. "Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life." She revealed that Lucas, the man she left Ethan for, had deceived her. He had been married twice before and repeated the same behavior with her, leaving her heartbroken. Before Ethan could respond, Sophie ran into the room, excited about ice cream. Ethan knelt beside her. "Sophie, this is Natalie." Natalie, now in tears, hugged her daughter briefly. But before she could say much, Olivia entered the room. Natalie's face froze in shock. "Olivia?" Olivia stood tall. "I've been living here, taking care of Sophie while our parents travel." Natalie's gaze darted between them, confusion turning to disbelief. Then Ethan spoke. "There's something else you should know." He revealed that Olivia had legally adopted Sophie and that he and Olivia had married in Las Vegas. Natalie's expression crumbled. She turned pale, her body stiff. Without another word, she rushed out the door, Jessica hurrying after her. Ethan and Olivia stood together as Sophie, watching Natalie disappear, tugged at Olivia's dress. "Why was my first mommy crying?" Olivia knelt and gently brushed Sophie's hair back. "Because she's very sad, sweetheart." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on Olivia's shoulder as they watched Natalie disappear into the night. Whatever happened next, their family was whole.